Coming up next on Know Your Legislators, you'll hear from Senator Kelly Stargel. She'll share how she got involved in the political process. And you'll hear from former state representative Seth McKEEL on some of the issues and accomplishments that are important to him. It's time for Know Your Legislators, where we keep you updated on the people who make up your Polk County Legislative Delegation. And it starts right now. Hi again, everyone. I'm Mike Moore. Welcome to another edition of Know Your Legislators, where the name of the show pretty much says it all. If you don't know a lot about your legislators or the legislative process, then this is the show for you. We want to shed light on how the state government process works and impacts us here in Polk County. Now, in just a few minutes, we're going to catch up with my co-host, HEDY WEDDINGTON. Every show, she travels across Polk County to sit down and talk with the 8 people who make up the Polk County Legislative Delegation. A little later in the show, we'll share with you a conversation HEDY had right here in our studio with former state representative Seth McKEEL. McKEEL, who was recently term limited out, talked with HEDY about some of his accomplishments while in the House and the direction he believes the state of Florida should be going. But we begin our show with HEDY's conversation with Senator Kelly Stargel. HEDY recently caught up with Stargel at Fresco's, a popular bistro in downtown Lakeland. We wanted to do the interview outdoors at Hollis Gardens, but the weather didn't cooperate. Fortunately, Fresco's came to our rescue, and as you'll soon see, it worked out just fine. Now, Senator Stargel, she's a Republican, and she represents Senate District 15, which consists of parts of Orange and Osceola counties and the northern portion of Polk County. Stargel served 2 terms in the Florida House of Representatives from 2008 to 2012. Then in 2012, she was elected to her first term in the Florida Senate. So let's now head to Fresco's in Lakeland, where HEDY is helping us learn more about State Senator Kelly Stargel. HEDY?
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it. Welcome, Senator Stargel. This is really an honor to have you here with us this morning. And I know that we had originally planned on trying to do this at the beautiful Hollis Gardens, and the weather just didn't cooperate, so we've brought Hollis Gardens to us this morning.
Welcome to Florida.
Cool.
Have a plan B when you're going to be outside.
Always have a plan B. I'd like to start by asking you, what was your motivation to run for office the very first time that you ever thought about running for office? And I believe that was for the House of Representatives in 2008. So tell us what was in your head at that time.
Well, you know, this is not something I've really had aspired to do my whole life, was run for office or even hold an elected office. I've always been more of the support person, but I'm a 6th generation Floridian. I love the state of Florida. I have 5 children. I want them to come back to the state of Florida, bring grandkids, get a job, have a house, good education. And so those desires for Florida have been in me for a long time. When the opportunity came up to run for office, after there was a vacant seat, Dennis Ross had term limited out, I had some experience in the process from my husband having been there a few years earlier, and people came to me and said, you can do this. Yeah, it was a little bit out of my comfort zone, big time out of my comfort zone. But my love for the state and for the policy issues, I thought, well, I'll start walking down that path, and if it's meant to be, then it will work out. And fortunately, I got elected by a majority out of the primary, and then obviously from the general. So it's definitely been a stretch from what I would have thought I'd be doing right now with my life, but I am thrilled and honored to have this opportunity.
That's great, and I know from watching you, it's very apparent that education and our youth are very, very important to you. I know that a lot of times your legislation will be geared towards the youth. What motivates you where the youth are concerned of today? What worries do you have for them, and what's your thinking on trying to make it a better state for them?
Well, it's not so much just the youth, it's people who tend to be vulnerable. I deal a lot with youth because I realize that their opportunities in life are going to be are going to be based on their foundations, how their upbringing, how their family life is, how their education is. So I try to work with strengthening youth in whatever way I can so that they have as many opportunities and as many doors open to them as possible. But I've also worked a lot with the developmentally disabled community, and I'm looking this year at some of the issues dealing with guardianships of our seniors. My heart goes out to those people who they need assistance and sometimes just kind of fall through the cracks.
I also have watched you over all the years because I obviously was in the process too. And I have noticed how very gracefully you work on your issues that are hard issues that oftentimes have a lot of opposition, and you seem to be able to negotiate with the hardest of the worst of the naysayers. What is it that makes you a good negotiator on your very hard issues?
Well, I'm honored that you would say that. I don't know, some people don't see me as much of as a easy negotiator, I guess, if you will, but there's always common ground. And I think 99% of the people elected, I'd like to say 100, but there are, who knows, there may be some that I don't know as well that not have the same motivation. But majority of the people up there are doing things because they want to make this a better state and because they want to do better things for the people that they represent. So oftentimes you can find that common ground. So you try to find the common ground and then work through your differences back and forth to see what you can come to that's going to be the best for everybody involved. It's no different than a marriage or a friendship. You just find that common ground and work from there.
Yeah. And I've also noticed that there are no mountains where you're concerned, because if you can't get over the mountain, you go around it. And that's an interesting aspect to watch. Your determination is to be really, really admired. You made a switch to the Senate, and I believe it was before your 8 years in the House were through. What was, again, your motivation for going to the Senate, and what differences do you see between the Senate and the House? Obviously, the main difference is there are 40 senators and 120 House members. Sure. But what do you find some of the major differences between the two houses?
Wow, they're very different. I see the House as being much more of a group, collegial kind of a mentality where you work on a process with several different people. When you get to the Senate, it's much more of you have an idea, you go forward, you talk to a few people, but it's more your idea, your motivation, and you have to convince others. And it's either a yes or a no, or, where in the House it tends to be more of several people would come together and work on a lot of different issues, because you've got to convince, a much larger group, so it's much harder to do it one-on-one. So you have a much more opportunity to get things done in the Senate. Which is great, but then on the other hand, you have more strong support and more strong opposition, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Do you have the opportunity to file more bills in the Senate than you do in the House? I believe that there are no limits. Is that correct in the Senate?
There are no limits. I put self-imposed limits because I want to be able to put the time and effort that goes into the legislation. So I don't try to take on more than I can handle. I want to be able to give my dedicated attention to it as best I can. So I put on self-imposed limits. You won't likely see me with 50 bills out there being filed, because I think less laws are better than more laws.
I'm sure a lot of people bring you ideas for bills. I know they come from all walks of life and all places. They come from folks in Tallahassee. They come from your constituents. Do you have a criteria for what you look at when you're making a decision as to whether you want to file a piece of legislation or not?
I do. I mean, it depends on what it is. If it's something that's just a minor tweak, an unintended consequence of something that may have happened before, I'll take on some of those, because typically they're easier, although nothing is easy. Even something I thought would be simple oftentimes is very difficult. The ones that tend to be the hardest are the ones that do come from constituents, where you're going for that underdog, and not only do you have to understand the issue and figure out the solution, you have to then get the supportive body who doesn't maybe have that same issue going on with them. We've done several of those, though. If you remember from people, one with Noah's Ark, my very first, that was my introduction to doing a piece of legislation that was just from the ground up, and that was dealing with the planned residential communities for the development disabled. And that was, you learn there's not just two sides to an issue, there's about 47.
There is. And I've also noticed that there are times when you might not get a piece of legislation passed this year, but you, again, from observation of you, you will go back after it when it's important to you.
Absolutely.
Time and time again. Is that?
That's absolutely. You have to make sure people are aware of the situation. And unfortunately, a lot of times there'll be a brewing situation and you try to pass legislation and it doesn't pass, and then something awful happens, it just brings more highlight to it, which is frustrating because if you had fixed it the first time, it may not have happened. We just did a bill this year that took me several years to get passed, which was the sexual misconduct teachers with students.
Yes.
I filed that originally about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. Maybe it was 6 years. And it took this long to get it passed. And unfortunately, during this time frame, you've had more and more teachers who were doing things inappropriate. Now, obviously, you can't write laws for lawbreakers, but we've done some things in strengthening legislation there. So if teachers do things inappropriate with students, they are going to be facing more penalties, possible longer jail time, those types of things.
Yeah. I know that delegations, we'll switch just for a moment here. Each county has a delegation which is made up of the senators and the representatives, and I've noticed that Polk County delegation has the reputation of really getting along well and working together as a team. So you often work together on different pieces of legislation to try to do things good for the state and for the people of Polk County. Is that correct?
That is true. We do get along very well, and not only that, we have a variety of interests, which has been, I think, beneficial to our county. I typically have worked a lot in education and some of the business areas, and Denise Grimsley has done a lot with healthcare and business. Ben Albritton is usually really strong in ag. John Wood looks a lot over the constitutional rights, and then of course Seth was appropriations chair. We all had a little niche of what was going on, which is beneficial because we will talk to each other, we lean on each other. There's a bill that may have gone through Senator Grimsley's committee that I have not seen. We can discuss those things, and we're like-minded and we get along, as well as our staffs all frequently communicate with each other and get along very well, which I think makes good representation for Polk County.
Teamwork. That's
Yes.
really great. We're coming to the end of our time, so why don't you, in closing, tell us just a little bit about how your district is comprised and what type of constituent services your district office does.
Sure. We have 3 counties, Polk, Osceola, and Orange. Majority of it's Polk, about 27% is Osceola or Orange, and about 3% is Osceola. We have community office hours that we do in Winter Haven and Davenport and in Orange County. And we do any kind of constituent service. If you have an issue, a problem, call our office. If it's not us, we work really well with Congressman Ross and Congressman Webster. If it's the county city, we work with them. So really, I don't want to say limit anybody. If you have a problem and if you need government to either get more involved or less involved in your life, give us a call.
And anybody can just walk in your office at any time. You're open to the public.
Absolutely. Can't always say that they'll be able, we can't always solve the issue at that point, but absolutely, if that's the easier way for you to communicate with us, you can walk in, you can call us, you can email us. Any of those are effective. I read my emails, they come directly to my phone. They don't go into Neverland. We do look at them.
And you have staff that stays here when you're in Tallahassee so that your constituent services can continue throughout the year.
Absolutely. Chris Dowdy is here all the time. Rachel Barnes goes back and forth with me to Tallahassee, and then we also have some additional staff members that we're getting to put onto our team.
I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be doing this again and talk about a lot of the issues that are important to you and to the people that you represent. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you. It's enjoyable being here.
All right, thanks, Hetty. Very interesting interview with Senator Kelly Stargel. Let's see, state senator, wife, mother of 5 children. So if you think you're busy, you may want to think again. Now, if you would like to contact her office, it's very easy. You can call her at the district office, which is in Lakeland. Her number is 863-284-4430, or you can email Senator Stargel. And she did say her emails go directly to her phone. That email address is stargel.kelly.web@flsenate.gov. And if you'd like to keep track of the bills she's working on, you can go to the state Senate's website, which is flsenate.gov/senators. That's flsenate.gov/senators. All right, coming up later in the program, Hetty will be joining me right here in the studio for a segment we like to call Civics 101. This is where she's going to answer your questions about the state legislator. I'll tell you how you can send us your questions at the end of the program. But right now, we want to share with you a conversation Hetty had with former state representative Seth McKEEL. Now, the interview took place a few days ago right here in our PGTV studio. McKEEL, a Republican, was first elected to the House in 2006, but in 2012, he was term limited out. On November 4th, Colleen Burton was elected to his open seat, and we're going to hear from Representative Burton in an upcoming show. But we wanted to give McKEEL one last chance to look back at some of his major accomplishments while working in the House. McKEEL served in House District 40, which includes most of the metropolitan area of Lakeland. So here's HEDY with Seth McKEEL talking about his past, the present, and even the future.
Thank you for joining us today, Representative McKEEL. It's such an honor to have you here with us, and I want to tell you how very proud we are of you here in Polk County for all of your accomplishments during your 8 years in the Florida House of Representatives, ending with the last 2 years, you being charged with oversight and the crafting of the state's more than $77 billion budget. We know that Florida has term limits, which is 8 years, so the election in November was the end of your 8 terms for you. But please take us back to the beginning and tell us what were some of the factors that made you decide to run for the Florida House of Representatives in the first place.
Well, you're right. I just finished 8 years, and it's been an honor to reflect on that. But it was a different environment. I had served in local government. I served on the city commission in Lakeland for 5 years prior to that, and the seat in the legislature, you know, what was available, and it made sense. Some of the issues that we were dealing with locally, from utility issues, regulatory issues, it seemed very obvious to me there were a lot of decisions being made at the state level, and so I felt like I could have a bigger impact at the state level at the time. I had a young family. I had my son was born during our first campaign.
I remember that.
Yes. And he's now 9, and you know, and so on reflection, being gone half the year is not a great way to raise 2 children. So it's it's nice not to have to travel quite so much now.
I'm sure that your lovely wife Kim and your children both are really glad to have you home now, and having been involved in this process myself, I do know your family, and I know she was a real trooper supporting you through those 8 years.
She's amazing. She's Florida's biggest term limit fan, though. She's very, very happy that I'm home. So.
That's good. I know that you moved swiftly into leadership, which, again, we were also very proud of you for that. What do you think some of the factors were that they look for in the state that creates the environment for you to move up in leadership? Can you kind of pat yourself on the back a little bit and tell us some of the things you think that make a good leader for the state of Florida?
Yeah, I'm not very good at patting myself on the back, but the piece about, I mean, the term limits have created an environment in the legislature where, you know, legislators have to come up to speed very quickly. As you know, you've been involved in the process a long time, and they have to come up to speed very, very quickly. So I guess my ability to learn issues very quickly and try to achieve consensus, I think were, you know, 2 of the things that were helpful to me during my time. But the House has very much of a team atmosphere, and you know, we all feel part of a bigger team, and I was honored, you know, for several cycles to be part of a larger team that I think was doing great work.
Again, in watching you during those 8 years, you just did everything with such professionalism and honor and dedication to the state. Are there any things in particular that you really feel good about that you helped craft to move the state in the direction that you believe it should be moving in at this time?
Sure. I mean, as I leave, I'm probably most proud of the fiscal health of the state. You know, we went through, during the majority of my service, we were in a historic recession, and you recall we had some pretty dramatic reductions that we had to make to state spending. And so when I took over the budget chairmanship, you know, we were sort of just coming out of that recession time. I'm very happy, as I left, we were able to put over $3 billion in reserves. We were able to protect the state's AAA bond rating, which saves taxpayers a tremendous amount of money on bond finance. And I think overall the fiscal health that I left the state in is probably my proudest accomplishment, and because I think that Florida, being the 3rd largest state of the union, is probably the most well-positioned economically to boomerang out of the recession and to do very well. And you know, I'm certainly happy to have played a part in ensuring that fiscal health, because it's you know, when you say you put $3 billion in reserves, those are $3 billion worth of requests to spend money that we didn't fill. And those are hard things to ask legislators to do, but it was the right thing. And so I feel very confident that we left the state in sound fiscal health.
I know the last 2 years in particular, overseeing the budget as you did, you had to have listened to so many requests from so many citizens in the state, from Polk County, from other members, and I know that if you had had dollars to do it, you would have loved to have funded everything that was requested. But what were some of the factors that you had to look at in making your decision as to what some of the things were that you actually could fund and feel good about?
Yeah, I mean, the state goes through a very well-run, in my opinion, process of revenue and expense estimating, where we have revenue estimators and large expense estimators. So our big spends like prisons, like education, like healthcare, we kind of begin to have a general idea of what those requirements are going to be, and then you make the rest of the sort of request type part of the budget a little bit later, and obviously the requests far exceed your ability to fill them, and that's just that's part of it. But that's why the founders had, in my opinion, a brilliant idea of a representative democracy whose job it is to prioritize that spending. A $77 billion budget has a lot of things in it, and it has a lot of priorities. But the budget reflects the priorities of the state. And when I went and asked the 120 members that I served with for their vote, I felt confident that what we were putting in front of them was a solid reflection of the priorities of the state. So things like education, things like healthcare, those are your the largest spends in the budget. And then all of the smaller requests, you just have to prioritize to the best of your ability. We had a great team in the Florida House of budget chairs at the subcommittee level who do most of that prioritization work, so that by the time the subcommittees finish their work and deliver their product to the full committee, many of those priorities are sorted out. And so again, the House, I think, is where I'm knowledgeable, is a great team, and I think I'm proud overall of the product that we put on the table.
Now that you're through with the Florida House of Representatives and through in public office for the time being, I don't know what your aspirations are over the years to come, but I certainly know where you've been and what you've done. But what do you foresee as the future for the state of Florida? And I know that the state is in better shape now than it was 8 years ago when you joined the team. What would you like to see for the future of the state of Florida?
The big challenges going forward, I think, are going to be healthcare, obviously, and water and environment issues. I mean, those seem to me to be the areas that are relatively unresolved. We spend about $23.5 billion on the state's Medicaid program.
Yes.
When I came to the legislature, that was approximately $15.5 billion. So in just the short 8 years that you were talking about that I was there, the traditional Medicaid program rose by more than 50% in cost. So that's a cost that the state is wrestling with going forward. I think it's going to be a huge issue for the next 5 to 10 years as well. And how do you continue to fund at that level when there are competing priorities, like environment, like transportation, like public safety, like criminal justice? I mean, important functions of state government, have got to be considered too, while you're spending more than a third of your discretionary revenue on the healthcare side. It begins to potentially crowd out other priorities of the state. And so that, to me, how the state wrestles with that over the next 5 to 7 years is going to be a big, big issue.
And I know that the state's prime source of income is our sales tax revenue. We don't have a state income tax, so with all of these other areas expanding, I know it's very difficult to try to.
Well, our revenues have been up a little bit lately over the last couple of years. That was the positive environment. We were able to to benefit from. We had the recession that we came through was historic because there were multiple years of declining revenue, which had never happened in the state's history. We'd always been able to rely on growth, tourism, people coming into the state. That's beginning to rebound. Tourism is doing great, and personally, I think that the lack of an income tax helps drive folks to our state and bring and boost the sales tax, dock stamps, the traditional revenue collections. The healthcare spend is a partnership between the state and the federal government. It's a match. We spend about it's somewhere in the 45 to 50 ranges between 45 and 50% match with the federal government on the healthcare side, but we've been able to benefit from some increased revenues. It seems to have leveled off a little bit, but I think that the overall forecast over the next several years is that we'll have increased revenue. The question is whether or not you're going to be able to, whether or not the sort of needs of the state escalate faster than the revenues escalate, and that's what the policymakers have to wrestle with.
I would like to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come in and visit with us today. We really, really appreciate it, and we can't wait to see what you do next with your career that you have ahead of you. But whatever you do, we know that you will do it with great pride, and you will accomplish many things in the future.
Well, you're very kind to have me. It was my honor to serve.
Very good. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Hetty. Another great interview. Now, since former Representative Seth McKeel is now Citizen McKeel, we don't have contact information the way we normally do, but you can follow him on Twitter @Seth McKeel, where he is now simply listed as husband, dad, and former state rep. All right, it's time now for one of my favorite parts of the show is when Hetty comes into the studio. We have Civics 101. This is when I learn so much, and hopefully they learn as well. Quick question, Hetty. Let's get right to it.
Okay.
Question is, how many state senators and state representatives are there, and how is this number determined?
It's determined by the Florida Constitution. There should be no more than 40 senators and no less than 30, no more than 120 House members and no less than 80, and we are currently sitting at the maximum.
I bet you a lot of people didn't know there was a number, a variation between minimum and maximum. That's interesting. And we're at the max.
We're at the max.
Okay. Now, I understand our elected officials are required by law to do certain things, a couple things in particular, and this kind of ties into this question. Tell us those two things.
One of them is to produce a balanced budget every year, and the other one is every 10 years, what they call reapportionment in the Constitution, and we call it redistricting.
Okay.
Okay. That is where they take the census numbers, and the census is done every 10 years, and then they divide that number by all of the House districts and Senate districts, and they come up with an equal number that each district should represent. And this last time we did it in 2012, and according to the 2010 census, Florida had grown a little more than 2.8 million people. So the Senate districts had to actually gain 70,000 people in each district, and the House districts, the 120, had to gain 23,000 in each one of those districts.
Sounds complicated, but she's like a walking encyclopedia. She's got this all figured out. So we're set now till 2022.
We are, actually, we are.
Okay. Again, Civics 101, we learn things on this show every single time. If you would like to send us a question, we would love to hear from you. Just email us your question. You can do that at pgtv@polk-county.net. And Hetty says she knows the answer. If not, she knows where to get it.
I know where to get it. I sure do. Thank you so much, Mike. I've enjoyed this.
I appreciate this. This is our second show. We got the third show on the way, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It is. It is. I've really enjoyed this, and it helps the people of Polk County learn a little bit more about their elected officials and their state government.
Which is what this show is all about. We thank you
Absolutely.
for watching us and hope you'll join us again for another edition of Know Your Legislators. Take care, everyone.